I call myself now a facilitation evangelist because I promote facilitation as a superpower for others to learn and embrace. So facilitation in its core means to help groups to go from confusion to clarity to action by designing a process. I'm not a fan of funky games, especially when they don't have a purpose. If humans would learn to meet each other as humans again, I think the world would be such a better place.
From the city of Peaky Blinders, Birmingham, England, I would like to introduce you to Paddy Danda.
As the world becomes more automated and the robots take over, it's imperative that we build the right human skills for the future. So pull up a chair, grab a samosa or two, and make yourself very uncomfortable. Hey Myriam, so glad you're on the podcast today. I can't tell you how chuffed I am. And I'd love to know what superpower you're going to bring to this particular episode.
There was only one superpower that immediately crossed my mind, and it is facilitation, of course, with all its beauty, which is maybe a meta superpower that we might need to unpack a bit.
For sure. I'm so glad you said that because I was hoping that's the superpower you were going to talk about today because that's what I know you for. So there we go. And for anyone that hasn't heard of you, who's been living on another planet, tell us, who are you and what do you do?
I invented a description for myself. I call myself now a facilitation evangelist because I promote facilitation as a superpower for others to learn and embrace. And I'm a recovering academic. So I did a PhD in behavioral economics, spent lots of time in the public sector universities, eventually quit my job, redesigned my life in Amsterdam, started calling myself a facilitator because nobody really understood what I meant by that, started a podcast speaking about facilitation and workshops, and built a community never done before where we try to move a little bit off the beaten tracks of facilitation. That's me in a nutshell.
Amazing. And what a superb podcast it is. You mentioned you've settled in Amsterdam, which is a super cool, fun place. But as we were talking before we kicked off, you mentioned you're also German. So I'd love to know what made you move to Amsterdam, and do you still go back to Germany and stay in touch with that side of your past?
I think I was born with a wanderlust. So I spent, during my studies, I spent 2 years in Paris. I spent several months per year in Africa. And then after the PhD, went to Vietnam, where I lived for 3 years, and then lived 3 years in Luxembourg. And I'm now in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And I call it home. And still I visit my family in Germany, but I somehow feel, I guess I'm maybe a nomad in my life, in my heart. At the moment, I spend the winters in Australia because Amsterdam is beautiful, but nobody moves here because of the weather. That's for sure.
I feel you there. Don't worry. I'm in Birmingham in the UK. And even in the UK, I think we get the most rain, if I'm honest with you. Anytime I've been driving from another town back to Birmingham, there's always this big area of cloud just over this part of the country. So I don't know why that is. Oh, well, that's amazing. So I guess your travels have given you lots of insight into different cultures. How important is traveling for professionals, do you think? Does it help in the work that you do?
Interesting. Because so what comes up for me is that before the pandemic, I was facilitating on-site workshops for teams who would hire me to come. And so I traveled quite a lot across Europe. And then the pandemic hit and I lost all my clients. And this was actually the birth of the business as I run it nowadays. So I think it was for facilitation, although it was a big hit at the beginning, it then turned out to be really an opportunity because the world woke up to the need of facilitation because everyone was suddenly at home behind their screens and didn't know how to communicate with each other. Because being in the room around a table, you often don't notice how disengaged everyone is and that there may be only two people talking. And suddenly behind the screen remotely, everyone realized it was an amplifier. So, long answer to your short question. I think it used to be more important than it's now, although now it's coming back. And I think the traveling or the in-person facilitation has its place as much as the online.
Yeah. And
Mm.
I remember a few years ago when I worked for a big German bank. We won't mention them because they are awesome, but I don't want people thinking I'm advertising the name. And I was sent to various countries. And what was really interesting for me was just seeing the different nuances in terms of culture. And I felt was perfectly sensible as a facilitator to do in one country, perhaps didn't go down so well in another country. For example, when we get people to work in groups and then we say, hey, would you like to now present back to the wider group? There were certain cultures that were scared stiff and they didn't want to present back because their boss was in the room and it was seen as a negative. So, yeah, I guess it's interesting how internationally we are also very different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just remember the story you told me before hitting the record button about being in a space with all these nationalities all working for the same company. And this also has an impact on how you learn to communicate with colleagues and interculturally, right? Yeah, I think it is fascinating how it's different. And then again, I think the online facilitation and the pandemic also brought so many different cultures into the same space that maybe we also learn from the other cultures or to take our behavior less for granted. Because I also find it interesting, and I had it with primarily Asian groups where I invite them to go into a breakout room and to share with their partners their own experience and would then hear, oh, but I don't have expertise. I cannot talk about it. I'm like, ooh, we're Germans, the Dutch, the Americans. Of course, we can talk about our experience all the time. We don't need a theory or a model before that. So, yeah, good question.
Super interesting. And I'll tell you a quick story about my German colleagues. As Brits, we're very apologetic. And I used to come on a call, and whilst everyone's talking, I would be curious. I'd have some questions. So I'd go, oh, I'm sorry. Can I just ask a question? And I remember my German colleagues like, Paddy, why do you feel the need to apologize for asking questions? Like, just ask the question. And I was like, oh, well, that's just the way we've been brought up. And she went, well, as a German, she said, I would never apologize. And it was just really interesting seeing that difference in culture. I'm not saying every German is probably like her, but it really brought home to me that, oh, wow, like actually, that's okay to do. I don't have to apologize.
And then apologize for apologizing.
There we go. There we go. So, Miriam, I'm thinking about this word facilitation. It's a very broad sort of word. And could you just break that down for us? What does the word actually mean in the context of what we're talking about?
So, facilitation comes from the Latin origin facile, which means easy. So, facilitation in its core means making processes easy or making things easy. In the context that we are talking about right now, hopefully, is to make it easy for groups. So, basically, to help groups to go from confusion to clarity to action by designing a process. And it's different from coaching, for instance, where coaches look on the inner journey and the inner goals, so personal development, and facilitators look for a common goal groups have that they can solve together. And facilitation becomes a superpower in this context because we have to believe that the groups have all the answers already. And it's our task to help them to grow larger than their parts. So it's our task to ask the right questions that would challenge them enough to listen not only to what has been said, but to listen to what it's not said so that we can get them on track or maybe push them a little bit to leave their comfort zone and come up with solutions. It's our task to leave our own baggage and our own assumptions and ideas at the door. Because at the end of the day, the group needs to own the solutions. And so we have to be neutral towards the outcome of whatever the group wants to achieve, because they have to do something with the results at the end. And so in facilitation, we speak a lot about the concept of holding space. which sounds very abstract, but it basically means that we create a safe environment, psychological safety, where individuals, independent of their personality or their preferences, can thrive and give voice in whatever shape or form is most comfortable.
Nice.
So that facilitation in a nutshell, I would say.
Yeah, no, I love that. And this ability to really get that information from the participants, that's a real challenge sometimes because everyone's different, right? Some people are more extroverted, others are more introverted. How do you deal with all of that?
Exactly. And all the dynamics that come in between, because some take more space than others. Some show up and challenge what is being said. And I think that's maybe one of the strongest superpowers a facilitator needs to have, is to be in the moment and be able to adjust. Because yes, we prepare the session, we prepare a process, and then we come into the room and then suddenly someone says something and we realize that what we've prepared doesn't make sense and we have to adjust everything. So yes, ending, accepting what is present and what the group needs in that moment, building on that and making sure that they get what they need.
Does it take a certain type of personality to be able to do the role of a facilitator? So if I look back at my early childhood, I often say to people, I used to be a professional introvert and now I'm addicted to conversation because I do podcasting. I get to speak to awesome people every week. Like, what are some of the traits do you think that are important as a facilitator in terms of your personality?
Before I answer that, I would be curious, do you still consider yourself an introvert?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Because for me, it's similar. I always thought that I was an extrovert because I speak to think. So I find it very difficult to wrap my head around thoughts by just sitting down. So it's through conversation that I think the best. But the idea of being in a group freaks me out, which sounds weird because I'm a facilitator. So if I have a clear role, if I am in charge of the process, if I'm in control, I thrive, no problem. But then in group context, I would rather consider myself an introvert. So I recharge in alone time. And what is interesting is that apparently many facilitators actually are more on the introversion side. And what I hear often from coaches is that they would say, I'm not sure whether facilitation is really good for me because I'm introverted. And I think it's actually good for them because as an introvert, you have learned to listen better and you don't need the stage. And I think as an extrovert, it requires more self-control to really hold back, not to seek the attention from the group, not to be in the center of it. So if we speak of introversion, extroversion, this could be one thing, that it requires someone to really hold back, step back, listen, paraphrase, feedback to the group. I think facilitator to be successful has to be courageous to some extent. Because at the end of the day, groups need us because they realize that there's something they could achieve, but cannot achieve by themselves. So they're stuck. So they need someone to point out what's missing or to make the implicit explicit. And sometimes that's daring. And sometimes it requires us to say something that maybe challenge the group and we won't be necessarily liked for it. What is it according to you? What are the personality traits of a good facilitator?
Oh, wow. It reminded me of a story. I was thinking about an experience that I went through. So after I graduated, I really wanted to work for a big tech company, IBM. I'm going to put it out there. I had this dream I was going to work for IBM. And I went to their assessment day and I flopped and I got rejected. And years later, probably about 10 years into my career, just maybe a little bit more, I again had this thing inside of me. I wanted to be a consultant. I wanted to show that I could be a consultant. I wanted to know what it was all about. So I went along for an interview again with IBM. And the thing that really scared me was those group exercises where they get you all to form a group and give you a challenge and you've got to figure something out. Now, it just so happened that day, like everybody was really into the exercise. They were all talking away, lots of stuff happening. And I just happened to pick up the pen and there was a flip chart. And I just turned around to the group. I said, hey, like, shall I just capture some of the thoughts? And I did it also almost on autopilot. It wasn't something I intentionally did. I have to say, Myriam, the experience from that really gave me hope that introverts can do this, because I got the job and there's a number of other stages to it. But that for me was the most scariest part. And I managed to get through because I had the pen and somehow managed to, like you say, hold the space and start to get a structured response from this challenge.
Beautiful story. And it reminds me, so the power of the pen holder. And I would like to pick up this example because for me, it also shows the difference between the consultant and the facilitator. The consultant has the pen and the monopoly over the pen. The facilitator distributes a pen to everyone.
Nice.
So that everyone can take notes and everyone builds ownership.
Love that. Love that. And Myriam, if you're designing a workshop, like, is there a blueprint that you follow, such as there's a beginning, middle, end? Could you break that down for us a little bit?
Yeah. Yes. Beginning, middle, end, always important. Beginning really to connect to the purpose, to make sure, okay, does everyone understand why they're here? What's the purpose of the session and what's their own why? So why are they spending time and attention at this point in time? And then I usually start with I call it turn to your neighbor moment, where I want people to get to use their vocal cords as early as possible. And knowing that people might either feel hesitant to speak in front of everyone because it's difficult, or the group is just too large and there's nothing worse than, okay, now everyone introduced themselves. And after number 3, nobody listens and nobody's interested. So turn to your neighbor is, even in an online call, the most natural thing we do once we arrive somewhere. We sit down, we turn to our neighbor and say hello. So I do this in all my online calls. Start with a turn to your neighbor moment. The Zoom gods will decide who your neighbor is. Spend 4 minutes answering a question, come back. Everyone comes back with a smile, cameras on. And then I think of the outcome. So what is the very end? I always design next checkout or the harvest, the final harvest. And then depending on what was the goal or the purpose of the session, I think what needs to happen in the stage before so that we can achieve that, so that we can check out and talk about the things we put on our to-do list or the next steps or our commitments or our takeaways. And thereby I design through backward induction what needs to happen throughout the workshop so that the outcome of one activity becomes the input for the next activity. So every activity must have a purpose that is linked to the higher purpose of the workshop. Yeah, so usually I start with the beginning and the end, and then I fill the middle part. And then obviously or maybe not obviously, hopefully obviously, starting with divergent thinking means first creating many ideas and then thinking, okay, amongst these many ideas, where do we want to focus? So then convergent thinking, discussing in small groups.
Disruptive people in a group. What's your go-to techniques for that?
Embracing them. Mostly because, so I have 2 strategies. One is when I work for a client, I have conversations with all the participants beforehand. And thereby I already build a kind of personal relationship and I get a sense of their personality type. And then very quickly you get, and when we think of challenging behavior, it's usually those who know it all, speak a lot. We've discussed this for 20 years already, but nobody has ever listened to me. Why do we have to discuss this again? And the reason for this kind of behavior is usually because either they don't know why they are there, so they don't understand their role, and hence they disrupt and are like, I have talked about this for the last 20 years. Why are all of you here? And then it's important in this pre-conversation to really connect them to the content and to the purpose and to make sure, okay, what is your role? You have been talking and thinking about this for the last 20 years. Fantastic. How can we use this knowledge in a positive way in this workshop. And then suddenly they have a role, they're proud, and they don't need to talk that much and to disrupt. Or there are those who have to re-emphasize everything and speak significantly more than others. Very often they're aware of that. And very often they give me permission to interrupt. They say, or they extrapolate it on the entire group. One thing you must know about us is we all love to talk and you need to interrupt us. So what I would say at the beginning is, okay, I'm German. I'm the timekeeper. I know that you all love to talk and we have a mission to complete. So don't take it personal. But there might be moments where I interrupt you in service of the higher goal. And then I ask them for permission. They laugh a bit. And then I put my German hat on and wave with the clock from time to time. And then they laugh about it and it's good. So I think the most important thing is to acknowledge that nobody wants to be the disruptor, the bad guy, or the challenger. They all have their own agenda and they want to achieve something through that behavior. And very often is that they don't feel heard. So you need to give them the feeling that they're heard. And we also have big egos who just think that their voice and their opinions are most important. And for that matter, I don't create stages. Especially in large groups, I rarely then ask for one person's opinion, but they work in groups and then I ask them to summarize what the group has discussed. So they can share their opinion in their small groups. It's always the outcome of a shared experience, shared conversation that they present to everyone.
Oh, I love that. That's such a good tip because you're right. As soon as you get that one person who's then the presenter, they can just suck up all the time, can't they? And it just becomes really difficult then to get them back on track.
And this is something to discuss with the client beforehand. So if a client tells me, oh, and then we have the vice president and they give it just a short presentation, and then we have the head of marketing giving a presentation. And so we spend the first 1.5 hours on presentations. I'm like, no, we're not doing that because then all the energy is gone and nobody listens to it anyway. So, and then thinking along with them, what is it that they want to achieve through the presentations and what are other ways, more engaging ways to achieve the same goal?
And you mentioned there about almost setting some ground rules at the start about you being the timekeeper. How important are things like working agreements? Because I know some facilitators really are strict and they'll go, right, we're going to form a contract right at the start. Do you do that or not?
It depends. I may be less strict on that. And again, depending on the topic and the group, I would, especially if we're in the same physical space. So funny enough, I tend to do this more on site, which can also be related because then the sessions are usually longer and they're more difficult topics. And then I would have rules such as deferred judgment. We all judge all the time, but just try to defer it just for a moment or maybe a moment longer and ask a curious question. And then to listen, to understand and not to reply. And these kind of ground rules, I think are important. And also, once you have permission with ground rules, and especially when you phrase them maybe in a more humorous way, which is a real challenge for me being German, we talked about that. But then you can point at them coming back and say, oh, remember this rule? Are you being judgmental? Can you defer that? And then it brings a little bit of ease to it.
What's your opinion on icebreakers and energizers? Because this is often a big topic that facilitators, some love them, some don't. You ask some of the participants, some people cringe at the thought of an icebreaker. What's your opinion on this?
Icebreaker sounds like, and I wonder whether it's just the association with the term. I have a colleague, he calls them ice melters. And at the end of the day, I don't think that just giving it a better name changes the image we have. Maybe it does, actually. But the thing is, I'm not a fan of funky games, especially when they don't have a purpose. Still, I think we have to start with connection before getting into content. And there are some activities that help everyone to check in. So I would rather go with a check-in or turn to your neighbor. And two of my favorite ones, One is a superpower check-in, where I ask everyone, if you had a superpower, what would it be? So everyone just says one word, and which is interesting because it flattens so the purpose of this is not to know about everyone's superpowers, which is a nice side effect, but it flattens the room because it shows that even the most important person in the room has a superpower they would love to have. So suddenly it brings forth this human side in everyone. And I had a session where it was for a bank, and so I had a room full of directors, and they looked at me as if, "Are you serious?" And when they realized that I was, the highest paid person in the room started with, if I had a superpower, I would be invisible at times, because sometimes it would just be nice to walk into the office and nobody's seeing me. And everyone laughed and felt so relieved. And this really broke the ice of the session. And the other one is stretching. So if we go around the circle and everyone says their name and one thing, just invite them, okay, let's do some stretching while doing that. And it's so silly, and everyone is so happy to just get off the chair and to stretch. Suddenly everyone feels just a little bit relaxed, because it also helps them to remove the mask. For me, the most important thing, and I think that's the goal of an icebreaker, is to flatten the room, so to remove hierarchy and to give permission to everyone that now they can just be human and they can just be themselves, and that's good enough. And whatever it takes to do that without putting them on the spot and making them feel awkward.
Yeah, I won't go into what I do because it's probably not appropriate. No, I sometimes make people do Bhangra dancing, but that's another conversation. And what I love about those is they are very simple. Like, there's no fancy tools required. So you could do them online, like virtually or in person. Because I often see people trying to mess about with all this fancy equipment and go, oh, we're going to do this icebreaker and it's like a game and we've got to do this, and things start going wrong and it just gets really complicated, doesn't it? So yeah, I like the simplicity of that.
Yeah, and I think our attention span is so short. Looking at the YouTube shorts and Instagram reels, people cannot listen to instructions for a very long time. So you have to be very sharp, especially when you ask them to do things that they usually don't do.
My good friend Grant Wright and we run a community called the Visual Jam for visual thinkers. And we did a talk on this just the other day. It's called the Indistractables, and it's all about attention spans and how do you keep your audience engaged. And this exact topic, we're so passionate about it because we often set up like a 1 hour meeting, because Outlook tells us by default we should have a 1 hour meeting. And as you said there, our attention spans are so small at the moment. It's really difficult to keep people engaged throughout that time. What's your recommendation for like how long sessions should be? Obviously, it depends on the situation, but like, I don't know, if you're just getting a handful of people together and you're facilitating a conversation, it's not a full-blown workshop. Do you have any rules around that?
I think for a conversation where you really want to go also a little bit deep and not feel rushed. And then it depends, does the group know each other or not? Do they have issues to resolve or not? And so yesterday I hosted a conversation with some of my podcast guests to answer the question, what do we talk about when we talk about facilitation? And it was 90 minutes long. The time evaporated. And we still didn't get to land on something specific. I think more important than the time is how much time do people have and what's the purpose and is it appropriate? Because I always say that our time and attention are the two resources that we will never get back once we spend them. And are these 1.5 hours, 2 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours really the best way we want to spend them? And how likely is it that they will get distracted and open this other tab? And then I think if you design an experience for them that is engaging, where their voice is heard and you're not trying to kill them with a PowerPoint presentation, then it can easily be 3 hours long and people will love it.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear that episode now, that 90-minute conversation you mentioned on your podcast. So I'll look out for that.
Well, not yet. Hopefully it will become a book.
Oh, even better. There we go. We'll get it printed.
Yes.
Awesome. And you've mentioned a few techniques. Like, are there other go-to techniques that you often use during a session that you could share, or even some tips?
A few go-to techniques. So the one resource that I would recommend anyone, the liberating structures. It's open source. It's very user-friendly. There's a structure for everything. It's almost like an alphabet, and you can use the structures, put them together to form words or sentences. And one of the go-to, I think, is the 1-2 for all. So first, give people time to think by themselves, which is incredibly important for those who think to speak, the introverts, and also for those who speak too much, just to slow them down a bit. Then you put them into pairs to share with their neighbor. And then you put them into 2 pairs together to compare notes. And then you hear from all of these quartets to report back to the entire group. I think that's a beautiful structure to ensure alignment and get people to share their ideas and cross-pollinate. And then my favorite activity is the troikas, also a liberating structure, which is beautiful for peer advice, and it especially for in-tech teams who maybe even lack a little bit of trust and have the impression that they need to do all by themselves. Maybe they suffer from ego. Put them in a group of 3. It takes 45 minutes, and everyone will be in the so-called hot seat, in the role of the client, sharing a challenge they have, and then turning either physically away or turning their camera and microphone off. And then the 2 others are the consultants, and they will speak about the challenge of the client as if the client wasn't there. And it's beautiful what comes up to create empathy for each other's challenge, to share ideas, to see also the genius and the expertise in the others, to show some vulnerability in oneself. And it prevents to go in and say, no, this is not what I meant, but just to listen a bit. Yeah. I think these are my 2 go-to for very different purposes.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, I've got Liberating Structures somewhere up there behind me. It's a big, thick book. And yeah, absolutely. There's just so much goodness in that book, isn't there? And a lot of it's available, like you say, like our open source. You can get it off their website, and it's a lot of YouTube videos as well I've seen that people have created. So that's amazing. And you mentioned you do a lot of online virtual facilitation. Are there any go-to tools that you would recommend there that you have as your favorites?
I don't facilitate on Teams.
Wow. Okay.
I put it in a proposal to my clients that I refuse to, if they want to hire me for a workshop, I don't do it on Teams. Zoom or WebEx, no problem. Teams, I refuse for various reasons. Sorry, Microsoft. I use Miro or Mural as a whiteboard. And other than that, I use very little other tools because I think most of them are distracting. Sometimes it can be nice to have a word cloud through a Mentimeter. But I think the Zoom poll is good enough. Chatterfall is great. Creating some sticky notes on a Miro board is fantastic. And otherwise, every tab that I ask a group to open during a call is the potential that, they quickly sneak into their emails. Just LinkedIn very quickly, and then they go down the rabbit hole and they never come back.
There's a great platform called Streamer Live. I don't know if you've come across it.
Oh, yes. Streamer Live is fantastic.
There we go. Lux, I've got to give him a shout out.
Tina has been on my podcast as well, and they're part of the community.
Hey, awesome. Awesome. So if anyone wants to check out Streamer Live, do check their website out. I think it's such a magical tool that gives you so much.
It's an AI that uses the content of the chat to visualize the chat without leaving the platform. So basically, they ask people, where are you calling in from? And then everyone puts in the city or the country, and then Streamer Live visualizes this on a world map. Or put in all your questions, and then it just filters out all the questions and ignores everything that's not a question. and puts them onto a nice screen. So yes, Stream Alive is definitely a great tool for which nobody has to open another tab.
Exactly. And that's
Which,
the point of that tool. Why it's so good is it removes the friction for people to use it. Like you're saying with Mentimeter and all those tools, they're great, but it means I have to now get another device or I have to open a tab, I have to go to this thing, and it creates that additional little bit of friction. I'm trying to get an extra feature into Streamer Live at the moment. I was saying to Lux, on the big wheel, they have this feature which takes all the names of the people in the chat, puts them in a big wheel and spins it. And I was like, I want that spinning sound when it spins, like the sound.
yes.
Yeah. So he's promised me at some point they'll stick it in, but he hasn't quite done it.
Yeah, beautiful. And I like what you say about the taking friction out, because I think that's the essence of facilitation. How can we make it easy? And the friction of using another tab, using another device, making it difficult it can make an entire experience to follow it. It's this inch of attention that we actually want in the space. Or if someone then gets annoyed, it's energy that suddenly will impact the space. And I think the same can happen when we are on site with pens that don't work or sticky notes that fall off the wall. So if you're a facilitator facilitating on site, invest in good Sharpies and good sticky notes and bring your own tools.
I totally agree. I've got these really bad sticky notes. I'm looking over here. They're kind of peeling off. They're some cheap ones I got from the office, and you can definitely tell the good ones and the not so good ones.
Yeah, and it's friction.
Yeah. Nice. So, if I could give you any superpower to abolish something in the world of work for 24 hours, what would that be for you?
I think I would love to give them a superpower. I would give them the superpower of listening. And if I could abolish anything, then it's interrupting and not listening.
Why is that so important?
I think, and then, this could be that you are opening a can of worms, because actually it's the superpower would be I would remove their masks. I think if humans would learn to meet each other as humans again and not be afraid of being themselves and putting these masks away and meeting each other with their humanity and their vulnerability and their curiosity, I think the world would be such a better place.
Oh, I totally get you on that. I'm just thinking that as well. I see that often people have this face at work and this face at home, and we're very different. And sometimes you say, just be yourself, be human.
Yeah, you're good and beautiful as you are, and we all have our stuff going on, and we all carry our imposter syndrome around, and it's just part of being human.
Love that. Okay, we're going to try it. 24 hours. We can do it. And my final question, Myriam, where can people get in touch with you? How can they get inducted into that amazing community that you've built? And are there any resources that you would recommend for people if they want to know more about facilitation?
Thank you. So, how to get in touch with me? I think the best is LinkedIn. I'm an open book and I share about the community and about the podcast and everything else that's going on. And how to learn more about facilitation, of course, through my podcast. Workshops work. Otherwise, liberating structures, I think, is, as I said, everything they do is online, easily accessible. And otherwise, I think they're beautiful people to follow on LinkedIn. There's Thomas Lanthaler, who has a very peculiar and very creative view on facilitation, very unconventional and radical. So another person to follow.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Sorry, I was just looking at your bookshelf behind you. I'm always intrigued by people's backgrounds, and I was like, she likes to group things by color. Yeah, because mine's a mess. Mine's a total mess. It's like just the rainbow. Oh, look at that. She's got all the blues, all the yellows, all the oranges, reds.
And the reason is that I remember the color of a book better than I remember the title or the author. So if I think of a book, I'm like, this was the yellow book. And then I know exactly where I have to look for it.
I understand now, because I've always wondered that. I was thinking, is that because people just want to make it look nice, but there's some practical reason for it? So thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Myriam, I'm so glad I got to talk to you. I feel like I got to know you that much more. And yeah, I have your podcast in the car when I'm doing the school run. And so I'm there listening to the voice, but it's so good to put a face to the voice as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paddy. It was joy. Thank you for your questions. That really got me thinking.
It's the end of another episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please do connect with me via LinkedIn and drop me a message and let me know your favorite takeaways from the episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Superpower School newsletter so that you can be notified of all future episodes. Simply visit the website www.superpowers.school. Thank you once again.